The lake had always been my sanctuary. Nestled at the edge of the neighborhood, it wasn't just a body of water, it was a piece of history. My father and I had spent countless mornings fishing there, sharing stories and building memories. It was one of the reasons I'd bought this house, close to the water and far from the noise of the city. But Karen, the self-righteous president of our HOA, had decided that my peaceful fishing trips were a problem. It all started with a crisp white envelope taped to my door. I peeled it off and opened it, already guessing who it was from. The HOA logo at the top of the letter confirmed my suspicion. Notice of violation. According to the letter, I was being fined $150 for unauthorized use of the community lake. The accusation was ridiculous. This lake wasn't a community amenity. It was open to anyone who respected the land, and I had been fishing there long before Karen ever moved into the neighborhood. I crumpled the letter and marched to Karen's house. Her meticulously landscaped yard and perfectly symmetrical flower beds screamed control freak. She opened the door with a smug smile, her clipboard already in hand. "Good morning," she said, feigning politeness. "How can I help you?" I held up the letter. "Care to explain this?" She adjusted her glasses. "Oh yes. That's the fine for fishing at the lake. The HOA has decided that only authorized activities are permitted there." "And who authorized this decision?" I asked, trying to keep my temper in check. "The board, of course," she said with a shrug. "It's to maintain the aesthetic and ecological balance of the lake." I scoffed. "Karen, that lake isn't HOA property. It's been here for decades, and I've been fishing there long before you started your campaign of terror in this neighborhood." Her smile faltered for a moment before she snapped back. "Well, it's adjacent to HOA land, which gives us the right to enforce rules for its upkeep." "That's not how property rights work," I said, my voice tightening. "If you have an issue, you can appeal to the board," she said, dismissing me with a wave of her hand. "But good luck with that." I left, fuming, but I wasn't about to let Karen and her clipboard dictate how I lived my life. Over the next few weeks, the fines kept coming. Every time I went fishing, another notice appeared on my door. Karen even started showing up at the lake, clipboard in hand, snapping photos of me like she was documenting a crime scene. Then one evening, I ran into Mr. Garcia, an older neighbor who had lived in the area for decades. Over a cup of coffee, he let slip something that changed everything. "You know, that lake's privately owned," he said, shaking his head. "Used to belong to the Jensen family. Word is they're looking to sell it." The words hit me like a lightning bolt. "Sell it?" I asked. He nodded. "Yup. The HOA's been trying to buy it for years, but the Jensens don't trust them. Smart folks, if you ask me." That night I couldn't sleep. The idea kept swirling in my head. If the lake was for sale, maybe it was time to do more than just stand my ground. Maybe it was time to turn the tables on Karen and the HOA. By dawn I had made my decision. Karen thought she owned the lake, but soon enough she'd find out she was dead wrong. The morning after my conversation with Mr. Garcia, I dove headfirst into my plan. If the lake was for sale, I needed to act quickly, before Karen or her cronies on the HOA board got their hands on it. I started by tracking down the Jensens. Mr. Garcia had mentioned they lived a couple of towns over, so I made a few calls, piecing together their contact information. When I finally reached them, I spoke with Mrs. Jensen, a kind but no-nonsense woman in her 60s. "We've been thinking about selling for a while now," she said. "The lake's beautiful, but we're too old to maintain it properly." "Well, I'd be very interested," I said, trying to keep the eagerness out of my voice. Mrs. Jensen hesitated. "I'll be honest, the HOA's been pestering us about it. They want to turn it into some kind of private recreational facility." That was all the motivation I needed. "Mrs. Jensen, I'll pay your asking price, no haggling, and I promise to preserve the lake as it is. I'm not with the HOA. I'm just someone who loves the place and wants to keep it natural." She paused, then chuckled. "You sound like my late husband. All right, let's set up a meeting to discuss the details." By the end of the week, I had finalized the purchase. The lake was officially mine. The moment the ink dried on the paperwork, I felt a sense of triumph I hadn't experienced in years. But I wasn't about to reveal my hand just yet. Over the next few days, I quietly prepared. I installed security cameras around the lake, set up clear private property, no trespassing signs, and filed the necessary documents with the county to ensure everything was legally airtight. I wanted no loopholes for Karen to exploit. Meanwhile, Karen's antics escalated. She started holding impromptu HOA meetings at the edge of the lake, pointing out imagined issues to anyone who would listen. I even caught her leading a group of neighbors on a supposed cleanup effort, which mostly consisted of her barking orders and taking credit for their work. It was almost comical how confident she seemed. She truly believed the lake was hers to control. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. One sunny afternoon, I watched from my porch as Karen and her clipboard brigade marched down to the lake. They carried fishing rods, lawn chairs, and coolers, clearly planning to make a day of it. As they set up camp by the water, I grabbed my phone and headed down. "Afternoon, folks," I said, strolling up to them. Karen turned, her usual smug expression firmly in place. "What do you want?" "We're enjoying the community lake." I pulled out a laminated copy of the deed and held it up. "Actually, this isn't the community's lake. It's mine. Bought and paid for." Her smile froze, then faded entirely. "What are you talking about?" "I own the lake now," I said, savoring the moment. "So unless you're here with my permission, you're trespassing." The group fell silent, all eyes on Karen. She sputtered, her face turning an impressive shade of red. "You can't do that." "Oh, but I can," I replied, pointing to the freshly installed signs. "See those? Private property. And just so you know, I've got cameras watching every inch of this place." Karen tried to rally. "The HOA will fight this. We have rights." "Feel free to take it up with the county," I said with a shrug. "They're already aware of the sale. Good luck with that." Karen stormed off, muttering something about lawyers and revenge. Her entourage followed, looking sheepish. As I stood there watching the lake shimmer under the afternoon sun, I couldn't help but smile. The tables had officially turned, and Karen was about to find out just how outmatched she was. "You said." Lake was immediate and hilarious. For the first time, the neighborhood began to see her for what she truly was, a loud, self-entitled bully who had overstepped her bounds. But knowing Karen, I figured she wouldn't take her defeat lying down. Sure enough, a few days later, I got a knock at my door. Standing there was Karen, flanked by two other HOA board members, both of whom looked thoroughly uncomfortable. Karen, however, was all fire and fury. "This has gone far enough," she snapped, holding up a stack of papers. "We're filing a formal complaint against you for disrupting the neighborhood and denying community access to the lake." I leaned against the doorframe, barely suppressing a grin. "Disrupting the neighborhood? Karen, I've done nothing but stop trespassers from using my private property. If you want to file a complaint, be my guest. But let me save you some time, this isn't going anywhere." She shoved the papers toward me. "We'll see about that." I took them, glanced over the nonsense legal jargon, and handed them back. "Nice try, but you have no authority here. You should have learned that by now." Karen's face turned an even deeper shade of red, but before she could spit out another threat, one of the board members cleared his throat. "Maybe we should discuss this at the next meeting, Karen." Karen shot him a glare but eventually stomped off, her entourage trailing behind. The next HOA meeting was a spectacle. Karen had rallied her most loyal followers, and they were all prepared to take me down. What she didn't expect, however, was that I'd be ready, and that I'd brought backup. The meeting was packed. Dozens of neighbors crammed into the room, most of them curious about the drama surrounding the lake. Karen called the meeting to order with her usual faux professionalism, but it wasn't long before the real fireworks began. "The misuse of this lake," Karen began, pointing a manicured finger at me, "has created an unsafe and unsightly situation for the entire neighborhood. As HOA president, I demand that it be returned to community control." A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. I stood up, taking my time as I unfolded a thick stack of papers. "First of all, let's clarify something. This lake has never been under HOA jurisdiction. It's private property, and as of last month, I own it outright." Karen's face twitched, but I continued before she could interrupt. "Second, I have documented proof of Karen's repeated trespassing, harassment, and even encouraging others to violate property laws. And if that's not enough, I also have security footage of her leading a group onto my land despite clear signage prohibiting it." I handed the stack of papers to Mrs. Jenkins, the HOA secretary, who flipped through them with wide eyes. "Lastly," I added, pulling out my phone, "here's the footage from last weekend." I hit play, and the room fell silent as Karen's unauthorized fishing trip played out on the screen. Her voice was unmistakable as she barked orders and ignored the signs. By the time the video ended, Karen looked like she wanted to sink through the floor. The room erupted into chatter. One neighbor stood up and said, "Karen, you've been making our lives miserable for years. This is the last straw." Another chimed in, "You've overstepped your bounds and it's time for you to step down." Karen tried to regain control, but it was too late. The board members voted on the spot to suspend her from her position as HOA president pending a formal review. Her reign of terror was effectively over. As I walked out of the meeting, a few neighbors patted me on the back, thanking me for standing up to her. But I wasn't done yet. Karen had tried to bully me into submission, and it was time for her to face the full consequences of her actions. The next phase of my plan was already in motion, and Karen was about to learn what happens when you push the wrong person too far. You said. The days following the HOA meeting were a whirlwind of activity. Karen had been dethroned, but I knew better than to assume she was done causing trouble. Karen wasn't one to give up easily, and I had no doubt she'd try to spin her defeat into some sort of comeback. That's why I decided to put the nail in the coffin. Step 1 was filing a formal trespassing complaint against Karen and the others who had ignored my signs and fished on my property. The local authorities took the matter seriously, especially after I presented the security footage and the timeline of her harassment. Karen and her group were hit with citations and fines, not huge ones but enough to make a point. Step 2 was ensuring the entire neighborhood knew the truth about Karen's antics. I worked with a few neighbors who'd grown tired of her behavior to draft a newsletter detailing her misconduct. It included everything: the fake fines, the unauthorized trespassing, and the video evidence from the lake. Copies were distributed to every household in the area. Step 3 was the cherry on top. I decided to host a public event at the lake. Unlike Karen's reckless disregard for rules, my event would be fully compliant with the law and inclusive to those who weren't part of the HOA's clique. I partnered with a local wildlife conservation group and organized a cleanup and educational workshop about preserving natural spaces. The group brought kayaks, fishing gear, and experts to teach kids and adults about the local ecosystem. The event was a smashing success. Families from all over the area showed up, excited to enjoy the lake in a respectful, community-focused way. Kids learned how to fish properly, adults swapped stories over fresh lemonade, and the conservationists shared tips on maintaining the beauty of the lake. Karen, however, was notably absent. Later that evening, as I stood by the water's edge watching the sunset reflect on the still surface, a few neighbors approached me. "I have to admit," Mrs. Jenkins said, smiling sheepishly, "I was skeptical of all this at first, but you've done a great thing here. The lake's better off in your hands." "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched. Another neighbor added, "You've really turned this into something special. Karen never cared about the community like this." Their words solidified what I already knew: Karen's grip on the neighborhood had officially crumbled. In the weeks that followed, Karen put her house up for sale. Word spread quickly that she was leaving the neighborhood, likely seeking a fresh start in a new place where no one knew her reputation. As for the lake, I continued to maintain it as a peaceful retreat, not just for myself, but for those who appreciated its beauty and respected its boundaries. The HOA steered clear of me after the fallout, and the neighborhood began to rebuild itself into something better, free from Karen's oppressive rules. One quiet evening, as I cast my fishing line into the calm water, I reflected on everything that had happened. Karen had tried to wield her power like a weapon, but in the end she had underestimated me, and the law. Justice wasn't just served, it was caught, released, and enjoyed on the banks of my very own lake. You said. Write a 4-chapter prompt. ChatGPT said. Chapter 1 prompt. The protagonist enjoys peaceful weekends fishing at a beloved local lake. HOA President Karen issues a fine, claiming fishing there violates HOA rules. The protagonist, who knows the lake isn't HOA property, confronts Karen but is met with arrogance and threats of escalating fines. Tensions rise as Karen spreads false claims about the protagonist to the neighborhood. The chapter ends with the protagonist discovering that the lake is privately owned and currently up for sale, planting the seed for a bold plan. Chapter 2 prompt. The protagonist begins researching property laws and negotiating with the lake's owners, the Jensens, to purchase the property. Meanwhile, Karen escalates her harassment by rallying the HOA board and sending increasingly absurd fines. Tensions peak when Karen holds a meeting at the lake, declaring it community property. The chapter concludes with the protagonist finalizing the purchase of the lake in secret, preparing to unveil their ownership in spectacular fashion. Chapter 3 prompt. The protagonist reveals their ownership of the lake at an HOA meeting, presenting legal documentation and video evidence of Karen's trespassing and misconduct. The neighborhood is shocked, and Karen is humiliated but vows to fight back. Ignoring the private property, no trespassing signs, Karen leads a group of neighbors to fish at the lake, only to be caught on the protagonist's security cameras. The chapter ends with Karen facing immediate consequences, setting the stage for her downfall. Chapter 4 Prompt. The protagonist files formal complaints against Karen and her trespassing group, resulting in fines and legal action. A public newsletter exposing Karen's behavior circulates, turning the neighborhood against her. To celebrate, the protagonist hosts a community event at the lake, partnering with local conservationists to educate and unite the area. Karen, facing widespread backlash and no support, sells her house and leaves the neighborhood. The story concludes with the protagonist fishing peacefully, reflecting on their victory and the restored harmony in their community.